Hey, everybody. Welcome to season 4 of Splintered Grace. We're excited to be back with you guys. Just a quick reminder of who I am. My name is Tina Frank, and I'm a mature Christian who follows the teachings of Jesus Christ.
And I'm Bonnie Violet, a trans, femme, genderqueer spiritual drag artist, identity doula, and digital chaplain.
While many family members are choosing to no longer speak to each other,
We have chosen to sit at the table and engage in an anti-cancel culture conversation.
to find peace and restoration.
Splintered Grace is brought to you by a Queer Chaplain Productions, and each week we go live for our vodcast audience on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and you can listen to us pretty much immediately after um, our live show, about an hour after we begin. So it's about a 45-minute show, but give me 15 minutes to upload it to the podcast format.
Awesome. So, hey, we're going to start out with an amazing topics. Over the break we had and some of the conversations that we had, I got a lot of questions about what some of the letters mean, and I hope I'm saying that right because I don't want to be offensive. So, we're going to talk today about some of those meanings. We're talking about specifically the LGBTQ2IA plus acronyms and what goes along with those. So if you're like me, and I don't want to be offensive, but I want to understand everybody, I'm going to take notes. So I have my pen. So Bonnie Violet, we appreciate you taking the time to share this because we want to get to know you guys, you and everybody else around you, much better.
Great. Thanks so much, Tina. Thanks for popping us into that. Good morning to whoever is saying good morning to us in Facebook land. It's not showing me your name, but either way, I'm glad that you could join us this morning. Just kind of preface a little bit, LGBTQIA plus kind of the letters that I put in the description. You may see a combination of these letters. You might see less of the same letters. You might even see a few more of the letters. And the LGBTQIA plus community is often lumped together, but it's a very unique and diverse group of people. And every letter is, like it does mean a different, maybe
That's what I thought.
like a different identifier. And it's
Yeah.
not all the same. Like for instance, there's gender, and there's sexuality or sex.
Okay.
Or sexual orientation. So that's the whole thing. It's not like it's like, oh, these are all different kinds of sexual orientations, or these
Okay.
are all kinds of genders, or
Okay.
so it's kind of like a combinate, like those things are kind of put together. So I think sometimes it can be confusing to folks who aren't kind of part of the LGBTQ IA plus community, and even at that, some folks might still have a hard time understanding the other if their gender is different um,
Gotcha.
than than say, like just because a person is gay does not necessarily mean they're going to understand what it means to be trans. Though um, in kind of a heterosexual world, a non-LGBTQIA world, um, people might see it as one and the same. Um,
Gotcha.
and
Did you say
sometimes
that it's okay to just use a few of the acronyms? So if I was to, I don't know, write something to someone or make an announcement of some kind, would I need to have
Mhm.
all those acronyms to be appropriate?
I think part of it is just, I guess I was prefacing that in the sense of you might only see like LGBT was commonly all you saw everywhere for a long time.
Right, that's
And
true.
then you started seeing the Q and the I and the two and the plus. And so any sort of, I guess, kind of delineation of those is probably, probably trying to get to saying the whole group of folks.
Okay, okay.
But there is some historical context to that as well. And there also might be some specificity. For instance, I was so the two is for
Making
two
notes.
spirit. uh, Um, and two spirit is something that I don't know a lot to speak on. So I would really encourage folks to kind of Google a little bit. But my understanding, like two spirit is kind of, it's an indigenous term. And I feel like it's in a term that was given, like it's not, like not every tribe, not every group of people, they had what we might say are two-spirit people, but they might have had different names for that um, within their own tribe and their own group of people. So I'm not going to speak too much on that, but I just want to
Okay.
bring up that if you see the two, that's people are including the two-spirit community. Um, and maybe there'll be a time that we can have someone share a little bit more with us on that. But also, one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about is, or what I'm going to kind of refer folks to, is to Google. I know that might sound like a lot for some folks and might sound a little simplistic for others. But I think if, being able to Google these terms and um, reading up on what people say about it. There's great videos that explain things to you, as well as there's things that you can read. Um, I know that it can be a little overwhelming because there's so many resources, and it can sometimes feel like, well, what's the right one, or
Yeah.
which one's
Yeah, that
telling
was
me
my
the
next
truth,
question.
or this one says this and that one says this and this one says
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
and to some degree, I think that kind of speaks to the fact that there are so many like different narratives to all these types of folks and different understandings. And I would encourage you to read the resources of people, of the terms and definitions that are created by the people who are part of the community.
Okay.
So, to know that it's an LGBTQIA plus organization that's educating you on what the words mean, versus maybe somebody who's not part of community who's trying to talk about who we are. It's kind of in the sense of, I'm not familiar with the two spirit community, so like I could only go so far.
Right,
Um,
right. But if
and
I put
so,
into Google two spirits, then
mhm,
most of that information that I would need to know would come up so that I could discern what's gonna be viable and what's not.
yeah, you would be able to see
Okay.
like a lot of different things to kind of sift through. Also, I mean, it'd be great to look at, things that are made by two spirit folks talking about their situation. Again, two
Okay.
spirit is kind of like it's like an umbrella term. So there's a lot of pieces that are also part of
Okay.
the two spirit, um, community. So, um, and that was one of the things that like, and I think in a lot of ways of talking about the LGBTQIA plus community, in some ways it seems very like maybe very basic or very simple. L is for lesbian, B is for bisexual. And you should be able to say, oh, lesbian is women who have sex or who are attracted to other women, or, you know, um, those sorts of things. However, not all lesbians identify the same way. And like you might have, because it can get complicated really quick.
That's what I
Um,
was worried about. It's like, "Oh my goodness." So the L is for lesbian though, right?
yes.
Okay. And
And
now you're gonna clarify between the different types? Is that what we're headed
well,
into that
yeah. So, I mean,
kind
it's
of?
just I think the thing that's important about any of these sort of identifiers is that people tell you how they identify. And just like when I say, um, you say you're a Christian, it's important for me to not like, in you telling me you're a Christian, you are telling me some things about you,
Mhm.
like in that, but you're not telling me everything about you. You might be telling me that you follow Christ, right? Like that should be like a basic that probably any person who identifies as Christian, they're Christ-like or they're working to being Christ-like, right?
Mhm.
But there's a ton of different ways on how people will attempt to do that or see, understand how it is to live that way. Um, and so yeah, so lesbian kind of in the basic idea is just same gendered women, so women who love women. And sexuality is not always just about like the sexual behavior. It's also about just attraction and connection and those sorts of things. So you can kind of um, maybe have feelings towards somebody that is sexual, but not actually have actual behavior. And then you have your own personal sexuality, right?
Right.
Um, so when we're talking about lesbians, we're typically that's talking about sexual orientation.
Okay. That was my
Um,
next question.
yes. So sexual orientation is kind of like who you are attracted to, who who you have sex with, who you identify being in romantic relationship with. So that's a sexual orientation. Um,
Okay.
being gay is also a sexual orientation, and typically being gay, it just means your same, like your same gendered loving. You might hear that as well, but gay often means men who love other men. Um, Yeah, but sometimes lesbians will say they're gay too because basically it just means that you love the same sex, the same
Okay.
gender, um, which is a whole nother kind of confusing thing. There is a difference between sex and gender as well. Sex is kind of like they say sex, well, and they don't even know that that really. Um, I haven't thought about some of the when I first grew up, when I first was teaching about like sex education when I was in my early 20s and stuff, they would say, sex is what's between your legs, whereas gender is what's between your ears. But
Okay.
I, yeah, that's what I've heard. I kind of feel like I want to like not really fully think that that might not be like the best way to talk about it anymore. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
That's that's
So
that's that's honest. I mean, if someone else has some comments out there that can guide us a little bit in that, then we're
yeah, I'm
totally
just
open for that. But I appreciate your bit of clarification because I'm
mhm,
coming from like far over here, and a lot of the people that I talk to are. So I'm hoping that this little bit of education that you're able to give us will help us out a little bit.
right. Well, and so yes, yes. So you have your lesbian, gay, bisexual is also an orientation.
It's a
Um,
sexual orientation.
yes,
Okay.
in the sense of like I have sex with both like my same gender and other gendered folks. Um, and then you have trans and non-binary folks who also we have sexual lives and um, sexual relationships as well. And so sometimes we don't fit directly into these LGB worlds because they are kind of based on a gender, right? That is either male or female. And
Well, let
so,
me ask you real quick. The T then is for trans?
mhm,
LGBT is trans. Okay. Go
yes.
ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Bonnie.
Oh, yeah, no problem. So bisexuality is basically the idea in initially it was thinking that there was only like a man and a woman. So you were either a woman who likes a man and a woman, or you're a man who likes men and women. Whether it's sexually, whether you're physically attracted or you're emotionally attracted or connected. Um, in those ways, again, sex and sexuality isn't always behavior. So it's not always the act of sex, though sometimes it is, right? It does include that.
Okay.
Um, so, and transness is all about gender, not
All
about
right.
sexual orientation. So the T or transgender, and transgender is an umbrella term for some people, and for others it might be how they identify. Um, And that might mean that if they identify as transgender, that might mean that they were assigned male at birth and they've transitioned to female, or vice versa. Um, that might be how somebody identifies. So transgender, trans, transsexual, those are all kind of similar terms.
Okay.
Transsexual is an older, more it's a more older term for transgender, what we would call transgender people today. Um, And there are some folks who still identify as transsexual. Um,
Okay. So
so
there's a difference between transsexual and transgender.
there so there could be,
Okay.
but
Okay.
but not like in a very general way. No, they're kind
Oh,
of
okay.
one and the same. I think that it's important to understand that if somebody identifies as transsexual versus transgender, they probably do have a little bit different understanding of their gender, and maybe their sexuality as well.
Okay.
Partially, I think that, you know, I think one of the things to kind of understand too is that like that's I think important to understand with like when we're talking about anything, we're like trying to explain something to somebody from their point of view. So if you're hearing words or you're coming to know words that you knew one way, or, like for me, for instance, I identify as being trans, femme, gender, queer. So I don't, and I'll say that I'm trans in kind of a more umbrella kind of term, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm just trans. I wouldn't say that I'm just, I don't know, I feel like I need to say more than just say I'm trans. For me to say that I'm trans means because of my understanding of man and woman and kind of growing up in a very rural, um, just the era and the time that I grew up in, I didn't know much about trans people, or that gender could be more than just a man and woman, and not just such a like a very gender rolled kind of man and woman. Um,
Can I ask a question?
yes, please do.
Hopefully it'll be hopefully it'll be something I hope it's okay.
Yeah.
So, you had said, and I know you said this isn't probably the best way to describe it, the difference between the sexuality and the gender. So when we're talking about this, so some people are obviously born male or female. So the gender transition or the trans part comes from the mindset, correct?
So people
And
are either assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. Some folks are identified as intersex. Some folks are born with multiple genitalia or parts of both, So folks in those situations back in the day, they might have chosen to remove certain body parts in order to choose one or the other. Or there might not have been a way for that to happen. And so sometimes folks, and or there are also folks that they wouldn't necessarily surgically change any of that sort of thing. They just, they just identify as, intersex. And sometimes it's not always about like the outsides. It's sometimes the insides. You might have
gotcha.
people who are assigned women, assigned female at birth, who might, later on, you might find out that they have testes inside their, inside their body. And you might find people who are assigned male at birth who might have like some of the female what are thought to be female reproductive organs within them as well. And so those are more internal things that you're maybe not going to see,
Okay.
and maybe not even know about until later on in life, because
When you say assigned, are you talking about when they're born at the hospital, someone,
the doctor
assigns them
says, "It's a
it's a boy
boy,
or it's
it's
a
a
girl?
girl."
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you don't hear people say, "It's non-binary, it's transgender," those
Right,
are
but it says it looks like that stuff can be not seeable. So they may
exactly.
not know. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why gender is kind of like it's what's in between your ears. It's like it's how you see and feel, like how you see yourself. And that's something that's in your head. It's not always your, like, I guess what your body, you know what I mean? Like your body could not, like for instance, I have a penis, but I see myself as more feminine or as a female. So the gender aspect is my
And you're
femininity, and like that's the gender, but I guess the sex is the fact that I was assigned male at birth.
I gotcha.
If that makes sense. I
Yeah,
know
yeah,
it can get a little and then we all get to have our own experience with these sorts of things and our own understandings. And so that's why I think it's really important to it is important for us to like Google and look up the general ideas of these words and what they mean. And then the more we come to learn about these letters and these words, and then we see how they intersect with the other worlds, because you have
yeah.
trans people who identify as trans. You have people who are trans who transitioned, say from male to female, who identify as female. Um, so they would not even connect to the idea that they were trans. So they would see themselves as a female, and they like other females. So then they would be, um, they would be lesbian. Whereas other folks would not. they would just always identify as trans. Like, I think regardless of what I do with my body and how I continue to see myself, I think um, I'll always identify as being trans or
Hmm.
identify as being non-cis. And so
Oh, that's another word.
cis
Is
is
that one of
another
the is
word.
that one of the letters that we're talking about? Cis?
It's not actually,
Okay,
but
okay.
I do think it's important to talk about. And so, one of our it's interesting. It just says Facebook user on what's coming across here. But this person is saying, and I haven't read it yet, so I'm going to read it out loud. They say, it is more than a mindset. The brain on
Scans?
scans actually lights up based on your sex that you are. You can be sex a man, but the brain lights up as woman and so forth. Does that make sense? So it's Melinda. So thank you, Melinda.
Oh,
I'm not sure
yes.
why it's not sharing that. So thank you though. So yeah, I mean that's definitely one way. Again, it's another way to kind of describe it that I think some people will understand that and other people will maybe not quite, and they
Yeah,
might need
yeah.
more information. So just like there's not any one narrative of being Christian or being straight or whatever, and a lot of like, do you identify as being straight, Tina?
Um, well, based on what I know that to mean, so I would say, yeah, I'm only attracted to men, more
Hmm.
specifically my husband.
Right. Yeah, and so I think oftentimes people who are straight or heterosexual, they never really like identified themselves that way because that was kind of thought to be like the norm. Like that's just what you are. You don't question it. You don't like it's just who you are. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I never had any reason to question it. I never had any attractions outside of that.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and so to bring up the term cisgender, and I
And
just
is
want to
that an
say
S or a C?
it's CIS. So just
Okay.
to kind of go back to that idea of like, for folks, I know that like, so this is for LGBTQ folks to be talking about this sort of stuff with folks who are not part of the community. It does take a lot of emotional labor. Like it's sometimes very hard to hear that people can't see your humanity, and that's not what they're saying, but that's oftentimes that you hear what you hear in the things that people say when they're trying to come to understand things. So for folks who are part of the LGBTQI community, it's just if you're not one of us, you have no reason to think about sexual orientation or gender because you never needed to do that. Now, I would argue that I do think that women still dealt with the idea of like masculinity and femininity as you grew up. I know you've shared in previous episodes about kind of gender roles that were attached to expectations because you were, a woman versus a man. And so those sorts of things I think do impact, um, say, heterosexual or cisgendered people. um, but again, it's just I think that most folks don't really think about it until they have to, and then gender and sexuality feels like these foreign things to folks who haven't needed to kind of explore that. And even if I just go back to when I was trying to like understand who I was because I grew up in a world in which I didn't see LGBTQ people. And if I did, I didn't know and I didn't, you know what I mean? It just wasn't
Mm,
talked about. And so there was
yeah.
this kind of like feeling of figuring it out on my own, even though I was already that. I just didn't know how to explain who I was. And you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And how I
Mhm.
was. And that's something that I've just come to understand more of the more that I've lived my life. Um, so I know we were starting to talk about cisgender. So
Yeah.
cisgender is CIS, which basically just means same. So it's just the idea of like your gender matches the sex you were assigned at birth. So you were assigned female and you see yourself as a female. So you're cisgendered.
Okay.
Um, you're not transgender, basically.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah. Hmm. Yes.
Okay.
And so then that's the L, the G, the B, the T. Um, Under trans, also though, there's non-binary. Some non-binary folks will identify as trans, some will not. Non-binary just means that I'm not male or female. For some folks, they might say, you know, I'm kind of male, I'm kind of female, or like I'm part male, I'm part female. Some people might say I'm not either. Like I don't identify with either. I'm just kind of in this other space. So it again, it's kind of just different people's understanding. As
Okay.
some people have spent more time kind of thinking about this, and they might think like, oh, well, I'm they might have a little bit more words to describe beyond being non-binary. They might be able to, like I say trans femme because I feel like I'm more on the trans femme side um, than say like a masculine side.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Any
you for sharing.
questions so far or things that are coming up for you or in the
Well,
audience either?
yeah. Um, I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't want to be upsetting for you or anybody, but it seems a lot of this is based on your sexual preferences versus
No.
on, okay. See, and so that's what I'm hearing. So I figure I'm hearing something different. So based how you're feeling one way or the other is based on what, not just who you're attracted to then. So what gives someone that
Yeah,
idea just because I'm born biologically and given this assigned this
you were
gender.
assigned. Yeah.
Yeah. So what besides other than my physical attractions to other people, what other signs would I look for to say that my assignment might be not right, inappropriate?
So so you're kind of talking about two different things.
Oh, okay.
So gender is more about like gender does not include like sex. It's not like who you are attracted to. It's how
Okay.
you see yourself in the
Okay.
world, how you identify. Um, it informs, yeah, like male, female, trans,
That helps a lot.
non-binary, um, bigender, trigender, you know, those sorts of things. Then when you get into where sexuality is more about who you're attracted to. So
Okay.
gender might be more about you, whereas sexuality, it sexuality is about you too, right? Like you
Right.
do have your own sexuality without having sex. And there are folks who are asexual who do not, you know, have sex with other people or are not drawn to have sex with other people. And again, there's lots of variations of being asexual. um, but yeah, so sexuality is also for you, but oftentimes it can involve other people, whereas
That
gender
helps
is
me a lot. Thank you, because
yeah, yeah,
that helps me a lot.
no problem. The Q can be referred to as I've heard it been questioning, so it might be somebody who's
Oh,
questioning their gender or their sexual orientation. Q is also sometimes queer. Um,
okay.
and so queer for some people could be about their gender or their sexual orientation, or it could be a combination of. I identify as queer. And some folks like queer is a very it can be a very kind of polarizing term. You know, queer
Okay.
is a slur. You know, it is you know, it's been a not kind way to
Mm,
talk about gays and lesbians and trans people in the past. And so there's a very much older generation who um, do not identify with being called queer and would find it very offensive and kind of
gotcha.
are challenged with the fact that there are so many young kids like myself and younger who love to identify as queer. Um, so like for me, I identify as queer, and to me, my queerness is my sexual orientation, meaning that it's not heterosexual. It's queer. It's not heterosexual and it's not like yeah, I'll just leave it at that. It's not heterosexual, so it's queer. But I also think my gender is not cis, so it's queer. I also think that queer for me is the way that I see myself in the world and the way that the world sees me. So I seem odd or just outside of the norm of
Okay.
the world, and that's where I believe God wants me to be and creates me to be, and I believe that's where God does the work with me, and does the work with, I think, healing the world in the way that I'm brought to be a part of, like creating the kingdom of God on earth. And so that's just like for me, like so queer is it's also my politics. It's all those sorts of things for me. It's all wrapped in. But you might just have like somebody who's a gay man who says I'm a gay man, and so that makes me queer. And that doesn't mean that I'm my politics, it could be like I'm queer, that means I'm a gay man. I happen to be Republican and I blah blah blah, but the queerness is the fact that I'm gay. Um, for others, it might be more than that. So again, it's just kind of like that's one of the
Yeah.
challenges I think about talking about some of this stuff is that there's not there is some, I guess, simplicity behind it, but like with everything, there's nuance, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so one of the things that I encourage folks to do, it's like you can learn about the letters, and I think it's important to stay up on them because I think we've learned better about how to explain um, as time has passed. So,
Yeah.
like for instance, I did a lot of talking about LGBTQness before I saw myself as a trans person. Um, and now that I've been living as a trans person, I'm still kind of coming to understand some of these things because I never had to really think about, or I never would think about what it meant to be trans when I was just a gay dude because of my own internalized transphobia. Because as a person who was assigned male at birth and grew up, I was attacked because of my femininity. And and I thought it was because I was gay, not because I was trans. And maybe it was both because maybe I was just gay and now I'm trans, or maybe I've always been, but those sorts of things can kind of I don't remember quite exactly why I was going with that, but those those can come across as two different things, right? And
Gotcha.
so it seemed more okay to be gay than to be trans in my understanding. And
Mhm.
I was still trying to figure out myself and I was confused. And so I didn't want other people to be confused about my confusion either.
Gotcha.
If that makes, I mean, you know what it's like to grow older and come to understand yourself differently and have one identity and understanding of yourself, and then
Mhm.
life happens or you learn something new and you're like, oh wait, that doesn't fit anymore. Can you think of anything for you that comes to mind that's a similar experience when you hear that?
Um, I can't. I've always, I mean, knowing who I am was always part of my uh, way to interact. That
Mhm.
okay. So knowing I've never questioned my gender, um, my biological male or female. I've never had a desire to question that. So for me, the only changes that I've pursued or desired were spiritual changes where I can be closer to what I felt was my purpose and peace. And
Mhm.
so for me, that's been a spiritual journey, not necessarily a physical journey of my life. Does that make sense?
I do. I understand what you're saying, yes. And
Okay.
I think that's important for I think people when understanding when you are I think a lot of the times we are challenged to same our experience with folks who are different from us. And I think it's really important for us to I know a big part of my beginnings was to look for the sameness in someone. And I think the more I can see that we're different and we have different experiences, the better I am
Mhm.
in in my understanding and being in relationship with someone else. Because and so I think that's great that you're not like that you can see that these are, I guess, different sorts of situations.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I don't consider myself the same as anybody just because I have the same anatomy. Um, I'm very unique. I'm very
Right.
unique in the way I think. I'm very unique in how I live my life, how I interact with people. But I've never had a moment where I've questioned. And I've always, I mean, I've had moments where I haven't gotten along with people for sure, or
Right.
someone would say something to me that would challenge the path that I chose um, uh, for my life, knowing that I was trying to move forward. But nothing that I couldn't actually just adjust or disassociate. I've disassociated with people in my life who have thought, okay, so you're not, um, you're trying to make me like you. I don't want to be like you in the spiritual sense or in the motivation
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
And
sorry, I feel like I'm not making any sense at all.
no, I get it. And I think there is some like physical aspects, and I think um what I would like to challenge, or what I would like to also be able to say in this, is that our experience with our bodies, with our physical, with our gender, with our sexuality, with our sexual orientation, like that is part of our spirituality as well. Like our spirit and our spirituality, and God is a part of that. And I think oftentimes it's troubling, or I've been challenged when it's thought that these things aren't related. You know, my transness and me living into my trans identity is a direct result of me living a spiritual life, and my constant seeking and connection with, with a God, with a higher power, with the, you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
creator. Like, though that sort of connection and spiritual seeking has impacted my physical body. It's in fact it impacted my mind. It's impacted so many things about me. And I think it's so damaging. And that's why I like to do work as a queer chaplain, is to, like, that is I loss of when our identity changes, when we see ourselves differently, we die and then we live again, right? That's a very biblical thing. You have to die in order to, was it, you have to, like, it's in dying that we receive eternal life. Is that right? So it's like in
Yeah,
dying,
dying to self, it
right?
says
In dying to
specifically.
self, which is really around, I think, identities and beliefs. When we come to see or understand something different than our previous understanding, that is a death. That can be a loss in our, we can experience that as a loss, but it's also a birth. And I think oftentimes when that identity change, or that death, um, is labeled with gay, lesbian, bi, transgender, you know, any of those sorts of things, then somehow we feel like that is not a spiritual experience. It's actually might even be an anti-spiritual experience. Um, and for me, I feel like that's where it becomes harmful, or can become harmful for people, when it doesn't need
Mm.
to be. When coming to understand yourself more, and coming to understand how you are created and were created to be, like, that's a beautiful and amazing thing to happen. And that's a God thing. That's how creation works. And so it's just like, I don't know, I just feel like for so long we've been not allowed to identify as spiritual and all these sorts of things. Um, and I think that's something that's sad. I'm seeing
Mm.
it happen less and less, but that when we feel like it separates us, then it leaves big hole. Like for me, it left a huge hole in my heart. I lost community. I lost a sense of myself, and that led to drug use and sexual assaults and violence and all these sorts of things that kind of came my way, because I think in a lot of ways I just wasn't. Life happens sometimes, but I do feel like, it's a big part of that is that I felt like I was not worthy um, of God anymore
Mm.
because of those things, and that's just a lie.
You're right.
And
That is a lie.
yeah, and in that, it built up all this shame and this secrecy, and then all this division and separation from parts of myself and you, and like literally you,
Yeah.
but also just like people out in the world, and that. And so
You're
Yeah.
exactly right. That's the power that a lie can carry in our lives.
Hmm.
And so we want to try not to be liars or to live out the lie.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah.
Agreed. So we are like, we are running out of time
Oh, we still
here,
have
which,
letters left.
well, I think we have the I and the A, which are intersex and asexual. I did
Okay.
I did bring those up a bit out of order. One of the things that I do want to, again, disclaimer is like I am not the representative or the speaker for the LGBTQIA, you know, plus community. I can only share my experience and my understanding of my experience and how that might relate to others. So um, there is so much I didn't say today,
Oh,
and
I
I
can
don't want
imagine.
anyone to think that I was attempting. I didn't say enough about intersex. I didn't say enough about asexuality. I'm not. I don't know a lot about that, and I haven't spent a deep amount of time coming to understand. Again, I've Googled it or I've learned about it a little bit, but I don't feel like I'm comfortable enough to speak about it on a public platform.
Gotcha.
Um, and I just want to encourage people to like, Google is free. And there are a lot of really great resources out there. If you're concerned about trusting the resource, just look to see if it's created by the community who who it's about. Make sure that it's queer stories and like that it's being written by folks who are part of the community. A great
Yeah.
way that I learn as well too is to watch. I like to watch things. So there's films you can watch, there's YouTube videos you can watch. I think it's been helpful for me too to even like watch movies um about groups. Like I've learned a lot about my transness and my queerness by watching movies.
Mm.
About trans people and gay and lesbian people, a person living with HIV, watching old HIV films have been really powerful and helpful for me too in understanding more of myself. Um, and I've learned about other racial groups and other just people who are different from myself in similar ways, reading their biographies or watching movies about them, those sorts of things. And those folks who are doing that, they're inviting you into that experience. I know sometimes it can feel a little like, I don't know, like you're taking or you're going into somebody else's space. And I think that's something to be really mindful of. And we'll talk about that next week. We're going to talk about allyship and how can we be allies to people who are different from us. We'll talk specifically around LGBTQIA plusness, but we'll be talking about just allyship in general. So we'd love to hear from you if you have questions, thoughts, or comments about today's episode, as well as next week. When we're back here. Um, did you have anything you'd like to say before we go?
No, no, I appreciate you opening up and sharing with us and giving us a bit of a foundation to start from, to gain some more understanding. So as we hear these terms, hopefully it'll help us, and maybe help us to ask more questions. Because I'm a firm believer that asking questions is the opportunity to learn and understand about the people that we're around or the situations that we face.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone who joined us live. As we said at the
Yes.
beginning of the show, we are going to be live every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. in Phoenix. That's Mountain Time right now, 9 a.m. in the Pacific Standard Time, 10 a.m. in Central, and 11 a.m. in Eastern. If you're outside of any of those time zones, I'm sorry, you'll have to like kind of
I'm
uh,
impressed you remembered all of those.
you'll have to kind of check it out. I've gotten a lot better, at least with the 4 time zones in the US, with just all the traveling and that I'm doing.
Hopefully. I'm grateful I
Um,
only have to worry about one,
oh, right. The
and
one
it
that you're
never changes.
currently in.
That's right. It never
Yes.
changes.
Yes, yes. So also to learn more about Splintered Grace and a queer chaplain, you can check out the links in the description of the video or the podcast that you're listening to. Um, Queer chaplain is, I guess it's something that it's my ministry that I've been working on for a few years now, and it's left my work 18 months ago to really pursue. And we have a Queer Chaplain does Splintered Grace podcast. We also do a drag and spirituality series where we interview drag queens and drag kings and other artists and lace their narratives with a spiritual thread. I do the same series with trans individuals and talk about and help them lace their narrative with a spiritual thread. We do groups and workshops on lacing your narrative with a spiritual thread. And I'm working on a spiritual drag con, and this stuff is beginning to happen and will continue to happen as I get your support, people's both support financially, but also like in like sponsorships. Like I've had wonderful people that have let me come stay with them and introduced me to folks to interview and to collaborate with. So we do have a Patreon that again, the links are in the description, and I can go ahead and put it in the banner now. That you could, if you wanted to try to support the work of Splintered Grace and a Queer Chaplain. I would like to take a moment to thank Casey, Mark, Todd, Jonathan, Gabriel, Jeff, Jeffrey, Violet, and Joey, who are or have been Patreon members in the past. The Patreon link is again in the description. It's just patreon.com/Bonnie Violet. And there you could sign up to contribute monthly at like $3 or $7 or $10 or $100, whatever it is that you feel like you could contribute would be super, super helpful in continuing not only this podcast, but some of the work that I guess spins from it. I think that's all I wanted to share today. So we'll see you all next week. Do you want to join me in saying goodbye, Tina?
Bye, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye-bye. Splintered Grace podcast is brought to you by a Queer Chaplain. Follow us on all of our social medias, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at a Queer Chaplain. Listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe, comment, like, and share. Feel free to tip us at Venmo, Bonnie Violet, and support monthly on Patreon. The song is original by Steven Sandnoff, The Chasm Between Us. Rest in peace, Steven.